Welcome to my YouTube channel, guys. This is the first ever video I am actually having on this said YouTube channel. Welcome. If you guys just happen to stumble upon, I hope that you guys enjoy the content that I am going to be providing. So in honor of what my first video is going to be, I figured I would rank every single January 2020 release that I happen to see from worst to best in a ranking-esque order. Now, obviously, some disclaimers have to be made. I haven't seen every single film that has been released this month. There might have been a few independent theatrical releases that I just missed out on. There could have been a couple of streaming service films that were on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus that I just completely ignored or didn't have the time or really the knowledge to go out of my way to watch them. All of that being said, though, I have seen 19 January 2020 film releases. And I say January 2020 film releases because I am doing movies that were released this month for the first time. I am not going to be going into the Oscar expanded library, so you're not going to see something like Little Woman on here, or 1917, or Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Things that got expanded releases but were in release last year. This is January exclusive releases that have been released either in the US or through a Netflix or Amazon Prime streaming service. So without further ado, we're just gonna jump right into the list here. And keep in mind, this list isn't gonna be pretty. January is a hot garbage month for films. I would say out of the 19 films I had seen, there are only 3 that I would deem good movies. Every other one ranges from decent to not so decent, but we are going to delve into them and get into the nitty-gritty of what makes each of these movies oh so special. One last thing before I continue. Some of these may include spoilers. There are certain movies on this list that I feel cannot be discussed or talked about or criticized without getting into the spoilers of those films. But I will let you guys know what films I will and will not be spoiling prior to the spoil itself. So if you really have an aching interest to see any of these movies, don't worry. I'm going to give you guys full time, and I'm even leaving timestamps in the description below. So in case you'd rather just skip an entire one altogether, you're more than welcome to just go in and skip to a film that you either haven't seen or you're more interested in hearing me talk about. Convenience. Anyways, starting this list off, at number 19, the worst film of January is a horror film called The Turning. This is garbage. This is like bottom of the garbage can January garbage. Like, even the ones on top aren't good, but like this one you have to kind of like dig through. The biggest issue that this movie has is that it's not scary. Everything about it is predictable. There's no real tension or anticipation for scares. There's no real engagement when it comes to the characters. There are a couple okay performances, which at first I thought, okay, well, this movie's really bad, but at least you have that. But then you get to the ending, and the ending to this movie, it is garbage. It's the worst ending of the month. I will spoil this ending, so in case you care, you can just skip ahead to the next one right now. It turns out that our main protagonist, who is essentially teacher, kind of like a stay-at-home teacher slash like assistant kind of, she is dreaming this entire thing. Imagine sitting in the theater watching this unscary, uninteresting, not very expertly shot horror film that ends with the most basic cop-out ending that any movie could have ended with. In my mind, I was kind of baffled. Like, I actually wanted to give this movie an extra point just for having the balls to end the way that it did. But No, it didn't. There's not really much else to say about this movie. The Turning gets a 1 out of 10. It's garbage, and it is not a movie I'd recommend to anybody, or even my worst enemies. There are worse movies for that. At number 18, the next worst film is also another horror movie. It's called The Grudge. Yeah, they decided that at the beginning of the year they're going to open 2020, open the new decade with a remake of The Grudge. A remake that lacks basically any understanding or real appreciation for what I think The Grudge did to the horror genre. I think that this movie's just really dull and boring and nothing really happens. You have vignettes of specific characters going through their trials with The Grudge, and it's very predictable because they all end the exact same way. There's some scary scenes, these people are going through turmoil, they have personal conflicts with the people around them. Ultimately, what do you think's going to happen? The Grudge is going to come in, the Grudge is going to do its Grudge thing. And the biggest thing about this movie, too, that I think keeps it from being better is the fact that it just is kind of aimless. There's no overarching idea or themes that they're presenting. It just feels like they made a regular horror movie that had little to no substance and decided, you know what, we might be able to get more butts in the seats if we put The Grudge on it. Now, I will say, though, to the movie's credit, it is a rated R horror film, and it is extremely gruesome at times, and I appreciate that, because we don't really get a lot of R-rated horror movies in January, so I do think that the movie has that quality to it, but really, apart from some of the deaths, and maybe some scenes where the performances were okay, this movie's not worth your time at all. I'm giving it like a decent 2 out of 10. Not good at all. At number 17, we have Tyler Perry's A Fall from Grace. This is a Netflix film, the first film to be put on Netflix by Tyler Perry, made in Tyler Perry Studios. Now, supposedly, the filming for this film actually took place only in 5 days. And I mean, watching it, I suppose it's not that obvious, but that's only because Tyler Perry has made it a career to make efficient, not very expensive looking movies. Now, these movies do look a little bit more like movies than something like, say, Medea or anything like that, but this movie is still not good. It is a drama filled with every Tyler Perry cliche that you can. Man and woman meet each other. They have good chemistry. They are chatting it up. They decide to marry, and then all of a sudden, things go bad. Essentially, a woman is convicted of killing her husband, and she needs a lawyer to represent her, and the movie's kind of told mostly in flashbacks of the past of prior to when she ended up killing her husband. But this entire movie, its premise is completely faulty. There's not a lot of intricate thought that went into the details of what this experience would have been like. A lot of the scenarios are incredibly unrealistic. There are characters that have ways to get out of the scenarios that they just don't use. I also found it weird that this female main character is written to be almost oblivious just from the get-go about the scenario that she's gotten herself into. And there are ways out of it that she just doesn't take them, and oh my god. The ending to this movie is hilarious. Like, it's like Tyler Perry tried to pull a Parasite, but he did it with, like, 15 minutes left in the movie as opposed to halfway through. And of course, it's not as well executed. The spoiler for this one, I will spoil this one. Apparently, the best friend of the woman who killed her husband is actually evil and has kidnapped older woman and lock them up in her basement so that she can steal her security checks. And the husband that the main girl is trying to get away from turns out to be the son of her best friend. And even though he got hit in the head with a baseball bat like 8 fucking times, he's just alive. And it's shocking. There's no way that this dude should be alive in the condition that he was, but that's neither here and there. This movie's not good. I'm also feeling a decent 2 out of 10 for this. But it is pretty funny, though. If you didn't know about the twist, I apologize. I did give you fair warning prior. Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about this one. At number 16, we have a family film, theatrically released, called Dolittle, starring Robert Downey Jr. Now, when I first saw the trailer for this, my instant thought was, do we need, like, another Dolittle property? Like, is this, like, a thing that people have been asking for? And then the box office came, and it proved that no, this was not a thing I think anyone was asking for. Maybe people's moms. I'm not going to say everybody and their mothers, because maybe their mothers would like to see Dr. Dolittle, but... Oh, wait, it's not Dr. Dolittle. I apologize. It's just Dolittle. I don't know what to say about this movie. It's just a bland, boring, uninteresting family film. The animals talk. They have cringy jokes. There's no thought or complex ideas behind them. Most of the performances are actively bad. Even Robert Downey Jr. is doing this, like, accent that is all over the place. He's delving into, like, different regions of things that I don't even know what his thought process was. It doesn't really fit in with any of the other characters or the locations that they're in. And especially since this character's been isolated so long, it doesn't even make sense that he'd have that weird of an accent, but he just kind of does. It's almost as if the director told Robert Downey Jr., "Look, just do whatever you want. You're Robert Downey Jr. We're not gonna fret about it." So he's like, "All right, I'm just gonna go for it," and he certainly went for it for sure. I will say some of the stills, like if you were to just take a screenshot of like the animals in this film, they don't look that bad. It's only when they're doing heavy movements where the CGI becomes ungodly noticeable, and it really takes you out of the movie. The plot is also not really adventurous. They don't really go to that many places, do that many things. It takes them a while to even leave his big house to begin with. I just don't find any appeal in this movie. None of the performances are all that interesting. None of the technical aspects were really daring or complex. The jokes are super simple and surface level. I laughed maybe 2 times, and those might have been unintentionally, or they might have been ironically. I don't even know at this point. Rami Malek apparently voiced the gorilla, though. Did not know that. I actually liked him as the gorilla. So yeah, there's some okay voice acting. Like, you can tell that the actors are definitely trying to make something out of this material, but it's just not working. I'm also feeling like a 2 out of 10 on this one. Yeah, decent 2 out of 10. It would suffice Dolittle pretty well, I think. At number 15, we have a film called Three Christs. I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie. I don't know if anybody has. It had a very small theatrical release this month. This film debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival like 3 years ago, and it has had no distribution. Nobody wanted to put this in theaters. Eventually, January 2020 is our lucky day, I guess. The premise for this film is actually quite interesting. Richard Gere is a psychologist who finds 3 different schizophrenic patients who all believe they are Jesus Christ. Played by Bradley Whitford, played by Walton Goggins, and played by Peter Dinklage. I was forgetting their names for a second. So he decides to put them all in a room and to just see what happens. Now, the premise is actually based on a true story of a real psychiatrist who actually had 3 patients, which is kind of fascinating. But this movie is just it's just bland and uninspired in terms of what it's trying to do. I will give credit. I do think that the performers are trying. The three men who play Jesus Christ in their respective ways, they can be a little bit over the top. It can seem a bit offensive at times to people who actually suffer from schizophrenia, but considering that this film is actually based on a true story, I can kind of give it a little bit leniency on that, just simply on the idea that perhaps the real people involved were very much like this. And I thought their performances were pretty decent as Jesus Christ. The problem is that the vast majority of this movie were really just following Richard Gere talking to his microphone about the scenario and trying to figure out how he's going to legally get around this and try to talk to his higher ups about the situations. It's just really boring, and I don't think Richard Gere really has the ability to carry a movie like this when he is not really doing anything noteworthy. The movie also looks and sounds very cheap. This does not look like a movie that you would see in theaters. This seems like a VOD or Redbox release movie, which is unfortunate because they have a lot of good name actors in here. But yeah, I don't really know what else there is to say. They don't really have any thematic themes going on. Thematic themes. They don't really have any thematic arcs really going on. It just mainly feels like the effort behind the script was not given nearly that much attention. In the movie, the whole premise is that he's just trying to put them together to see what happens. I feel like that's kind of the idea behind the script too. It feels like they just kind of wrote the script like, all right, eventually we're going to get to these scenes, and once we get to these scenes, the scenes are going to be great. And then you get to the scenes and it just feels awkward, somewhat stilted. The camera angles aren't very dynamic. They're very stagnant a lot of the times. The colors of the movie are very drawn out. There's not really a lot of vibrancy to it. So yeah, I didn't like this movie. Certainly not a terrible piece of cinema, but definitely not worth your time. I'm feeling like a decent 3 out of 10 on it. Yeah, that's how I feel about this movie. At number 14 is a comedy theatrically released called Like a Boss, starring Rose Byrne, Timothy Haddish, playing two best friends owning a independent makeup company, trying to be bought out by Salma Hayek, who is a higher up makeup connoisseur, so to speak, who is essentially, spoilers, trying to steal their company and rip their friendship apart. This movie's not that good either. I mean, what did you really expect? I saw this one pretty late. It took me like 3 weeks to see it because I just couldn't muster the courage or the energy to just see it opening weekend because I just didn't care that much. And when I eventually saw it, I was kind of given every reason for why I shouldn't have cared to begin with. This movie looks like basically every other big budgeted improv heavy comedy that's been released the last 5 years or so. None of the shots really look all that interesting. There's nothing in terms of its technical qualities that put it against any other comedy. It looks basically like every other comedy you've seen, which is all fine. I'm okay if a comedy is similar as long as the movie's funny. If this movie were funny and had a lot of really great jokes, I might have been able to overlook all that. But no, this movie doesn't have great jokes. I'd argue it might not even have many jokes to begin with. There are some lines that I did think were pretty funny, and admittedly, I do think that Timothy Haddish and Rose Byrne do have really good chemistry together. They carried this movie on their back, and I do think that there are actually some dramatic moments, even if predictable, that I think separated from the story of the movie are actually decent scenes. So there is effort being put in by these actors, by certain scenes within the script. It's just none of it is good. Most of the jokes fall flat right on their face. The story is predictable as all hell. There's not really any engaging differences in what you've seen before. You know, basically exactly how this movie is going to go down, which again, if the movie were funnier, maybe that aspect might not have been as aggravating to me, but it was, because there is nearly nothing to this movie that is worth any viewing or substance, at least not in a theatrical way. If you're like trying to rent it, I don't know, for like $3, maybe it might be worth it then. But I can't in good conscience recommend people go out of their way to see a movie that is almost exactly like every other comedy they've seen. And isn't really all that funny to begin with. So I'm also feeling a decent 3 out of 10 for this one. At number 13, we have an independent film called The Wave. This film follows an insurance lawyer who decides to have a night out of partying to celebrate a promotion, I guess he's getting, and he takes a drug that does some weird stuff to him. Let's just leave it at that. This movie has interesting ideas, and I think certain ideas within this movie are executed pretty well. I do think Justin Long is decent in the movie. I'm a fan of his acting. I think he's a decent actor. He's been good in some stuff, and I think that he is definitely trying in this. To be quite honest, I think most of the acting in here is pretty fine. I think everybody is doing a serviceable job. And there are aspects of the script and this adventure that this dude goes on in order to find himself, find his own purpose, find where his place is in the universe. And I do think that the ideas presented do add up to what could have been a pretty interesting story. I think the problem mainly that I had with this movie is the fact that it gets very jumbled in terms of what it's trying to convey to its audience. There's a lot of confusion as far as what's actually going on, and once you get the full scope of where everything is leading, it kind of makes everything a little bit uninteresting and irrelevant. I didn't really feel the impact of how this film concluded. I think if it had a stronger ending, I might have given this movie somewhat of a pass. But I can't really say that it was all that compelling the way that this thing concluded. I will also say that there are some really odd, like, mixing choices that I didn't particularly like. And there is a visual style to this film, for sure. But sometimes it did get a little bit overbearing. It definitely tried to do something different, and it is certainly a better looking movie than every other film that I have talked about prior to this. So I appreciate it on that level, but it's not a movie that I was particularly fond of. It didn't really end quite well. The performances are serviceable, but apart from that, there's not really much here to be recommended. So I guess I'm feeling like a strong 4 out of 10. It's almost there at average. Maybe a better ending could have put it above that hump, but for now, that's what I'm sticking with. Number 12 is a horror film called Underwater, starring Kristen Stewart and Me Too movement connoisseur TJ Miller. It's funny how, like, you could tell that this movie was filmed like 3 years ago, before the whole TJ Miller thing happened, and they were like, well, what are we gonna do? I guess drop it in January. No one's gonna want to go see that shit anyways. So here's the thing about Underwater, is that this is another scenario where I think the ending kind of messes it up. Before the ending started, I actually wasn't thinking this movie was all that bad. I think Underwater had potential to be a decent horror underwater thriller type movie. And what I appreciate about this movie is the way that it looks. It's a pretty good looking movie, especially for its budget. I do think that the underwater facility was very well produced, very well designed. I think that the creature designs are actually really cool, and the visuals look really good for a movie of this budget. I do think the performances are pretty solid. Kristen Stewart is good. All of her supporting cast do good jobs as well. I actually do think that there are redeeming qualities to this movie. However, none of it really goes above and beyond what you would see in any type of thriller like this, save for the fact that they don't even build up any of their characters. They just kind of throw you right into the movie, which on one hand I do appreciate, because there's a lot of January films that just kind of linger, kind of let you soak in things. And sometimes it's efficient in helping develop your characters, but other times you just want to kind of get into the action. And I think this movie knew that people going into this movie were just going to want to just jump right into it. So that's kind of exactly what they did. However, I do feel that they did sacrifice some of the character development in lieu of doing this, which is kind of unfortunate, because I feel like the characters could have been better developed, and if they were, maybe I would have cared a little bit more when certain bad stuff was just happening to everybody. But apart from that, there's really not much else I can say about this movie, except that what the hell was that ending? Like, the ending kind of goes a little bit overboard. Ha! Get it? Overboard? Okay, I guess I jumped the shark with that joke. Anyways, underwater. Nah. I mean, it's a fine January horror / thriller thing. If you're interested in it, it's still in theaters, I think. Maybe not. I haven't checked to see for that movie specifically. I think I'd give it like a decent to strong 5 out of 10. At number 11, we have The Last Full Measure, a drama about a investigator who is attempting to get the Medal of Honor to a Vietnam Air Force soldier who sacrificed his life in order to save troops on the ground during an attack in the Vietnam War. I didn't know what this movie was about going in, frankly. I knew that it was a movie, so I watched it. I will say the acting in this one is actually very strong. I think a lot of the performances in this movie are quite good, actually. Especially William Hurt. I think he gives a really good performance. Samuel Jackson gives a really compelling monologue. He really sold this character, this mood of this movie. There's a lot of predictable by the numbers elements as far as how the story's structured. Main character goes to someone's house. That someone talks about their experiences in Vietnam. And can we talk about these scenes from Vietnam? Because they're not good. This is one of the this is probably one of the poorest looking war scenes in like a film that I've seen in quite some time. There's not a lot of violence that's explicitly shown. There's some scenes of blood, but apart from that, there's not really a lot. And it's funny because the characters are always constantly reminding the audience of how bloody this battle was and how violent this battle was. But when you watch it, there's not a lot of that going on. Like, there are a few scenes specifically where blood is shown, but for the most part, it's not like it's Hacksaw Ridge or anything like that. So it did kind of set up a battle that just kind of never happened. And because that impact wasn't there at the actual battle scene, I think it kind of drew away a little bit of the intrigue that this movie kind of had going for it. I still like the performances. I still like the concept of the movie. I just think that the battle doesn't really help at all, and they're constantly cutting back to it. And there's not really a lot of style in terms of how the interview scenes or the speaking scenes are really arranged at all. It's a decent investigative war film, I suppose, but there's not really anything that hasn't been done before. Yeah, I'm feeling like a strong 5 for this one. Yeah. The next film, number 10, is a Amazon original called Troop Zero, which is about a group of girls who combine forces together in order to join this Girl Scout-esque competition that they're not really allowed to because, they're different and they're not popular. They're not pretty girls. That's really the plot of the movie. There's not a lot to this one in particular, but I actually do think this movie has a lot more heart and a lot going for it in terms of its sentiment, in terms of its intentions, and I do think that the performances are all fairly solid. Allison Janney is also in it, so this film does have a cast. The movie is just a little bit too sappy. It's a very, very cheesy and very sappy movie. But it's also heartwarming. There are quite a number of scenes that you can definitely feel these characters' plight. You can feel the connection between them. There's a particular scene that I really enjoyed with two of the girls who are, without spoiling it, because this is on Amazon, so you can just kind of watch it whenever. They're talking about events back in their childhood, and I thought that the way that the scene was executed was actually really smart, really engaging. So I did like it for that. The ending is weird. It's kind of funny. And it's empowering at the same time, even though what they're doing is like quite possibly the most disgusting thing you could probably think of. But it's still a decent movie. I think that despite it being a little bit sappy, despite it having a lot of cheese and not really being all that unpredictable or not really having a lot of twists and turns, you kind of know how the movie's going to progress. I do think the performances are strong. I do think that there are some good scenes in it. And it's definitely worth a watch. I would recommend this, even if it's just slightly, marginally, like a light to decent 6 marginally. So, yeah, I mean, Troop Zero. It's a movie, for sure. At number 9, we have a terrorist revenge film called The Rhythm Section. So here's the thing. With the Rhythm Section, my biggest worry was that the movie was just going to be a by-the-numbers, American has family killed by terrorists, so American must learn how to be terrorists in order to take down said terrorists. And there are aspects of that all around on this film. However, it is kind of taken from a different angle. Most of the time in these type of movies, the American is taken aback by the situation and immediately just goes into, okay, I'm gonna go kill some motherfuckers mode. But I do think that this one is slightly unique in that Blake Lively's character, who, by the way, is great in this movie. She is unrecognizable. I really appreciate the makeup and hairstyling for her, because she looks damaged, rugged, abused, and she really is. Rather than start the American off in a position where they are just this, blood hungry, I need to get revenge right away, this character has taken a completely different path. Her entire life has kind of spiraled out of control. She is not working at a particularly sanitary job, and she has issues with substances. And this is all set up before she even has the inkling to get revenge for what happened to her family, which I think is very unique for a movie like this, at least one that we haven't seen in a while. Jude Law is really good in terms of letting us see the training, see how this girl is going to kind of take this job and do what she wants to do, But it's kind of funny how every time she's in a scenario, she is kind of messing things up. And I've seen critics kind of put this aside and say it takes you out of the movie, but in a weird way it actually kind of made me a little bit more engaged, because we don't see movies like this in terms of somebody is trying to get revenge, but at every turn they keep making a wrong decision that leads to more death, more destruction for other people. Which I do think in a better movie, it could have been explored more. Because while I do like the fact that they do touch upon it, they don't really dive deep into the psyche so much. There are a lot of lull points in the movie. Sometimes the characters aren't really as engaging as they should be. And it does follow a lot of the cliches that these typical revenge terrorist dramas tend to do. Without really spoiling anything, there's not quite a lot of action scenes. Most of the movie is just her training or her attempting to find certain people that will lead her to information. So the movie is mostly a scavenger hunt with like a few action scenes here and there. But for the most part, I do find the movie interesting, although I can't particularly say it's that good and you should rush out of your seat in order to get it. Or at least watch it, not necessarily get it. But it's whatever. I'm feeling like a decent 6 out of 10. I would give it a recommendation if it's like a cheap movie day, or maybe you're renting it or something like that. But still not that bad. I didn't mind it so much. My number 8 choice is another horror film called Gretel and Hansel. I was actually kind of looking forward to this one, just based on the way that the trailers looked. And my biggest thing and takeaway from this movie is the visuals in this movie are actually really great. Like, from a cinematography perspective, the movie looks excellent. There's a lot of really interesting framing. I really like the aspect ratio and made it feel a little bit more personal and claustrophobic. I really do dig a lot of the production design, which is really stellar. Some of the way that they set up tone, some of the way they set up certain scenes are really strong and really engaging. And I actually do like the lead actress. I do think she was good in the movie, although it was a little odd that she was speaking with like an American accent while everyone else was just kind of speaking differently. Part of that could be the little boy is bad. Like, the little kid in this movie, like the Hansel dude, like, they kind of cut him off the movie for the most part, because he's not a good actor. Most of the scenes he's in, he kind of ruins. And that's a big problem when you have a movie called Gretel and Hansel, when a vast majority of scenes are kind of left to dust because this little kid just can't act all that well. Now, it's not to say that Gretel as an actress was any great either. Like, she did have a lot of stilted, very bland way of delivering her dialogue. But what I will say is that a big reason I think this is the case is because she was just... And part of that, I think, is also the script. The way the script is written, it is written to be more English, I suppose, in the way that the story is being told. So it just kind of seems weird that she's speaking with an accent outside of that. There are some really spotty CGI spots as well that are very obvious and probably could have looked a lot cooler if they had just used practical effects, or if they had a little more budget to actually add layers and textures to said CGI scenes. And I think the ending's a little weird. It goes in a direction that I didn't expect, but wasn't really all that satisfying. So overall, like, Gretel and Hansel is certainly a step above your traditional January horror movie in terms of presentation, in terms of how tension is built and what you're actually seeing on screen. But still, that doesn't necessarily translate to a good movie. There's still a lot of things in this movie that could have used a lot of work, and unfortunately, I just don't think was applicable to this film right here. So I don't know. I'm feeling like a decent 6 out of 10 as well. It's certainly not bad, but not necessarily the best. Not the best. At number 7, we have another independent theatrically released film, just released only less than 24 hours ago, called The Assistant. This basically is a story of a day in the life of a assistant to a big Hollywood executive. That's kind of it. The main thing I take away from this movie is the way that it manages to set up subtle, really awkward scenarios that a large amount of female assistants probably in the industry have had to deal with on a daily basis. There are so many subtle scenes that show the transpiring of abuse and harassment without being overly obvious about it. And I do appreciate that movie from that sense. I do also think that the performances are all really good, really natural, nothing too over the top and outlandish, but a lot of these performances are very subtle, very soft spoken, very natural dialogue going on. And I do appreciate the movie on that front. Still, though, at a movie that runs like less than 80 minutes long, this movie doesn't really have the punch of an impact that I think it intended to have. A lot of the scenes tend to feel less engaging and more meandering in terms of what the story actually is. Because really, there isn't a story to this movie. It's basically just a day in the life of somebody working in an office. So from that sense, it's not the most engaging idea, nor is it necessarily executed in a way that's particularly memorable or gratifying. And it's not to say I didn't like it. I do think the performances are great. There are certain scenes that I thought were really beautifully and subtly executed, but I do think that the movie overall just really lacked the impact that I think it needed in order for me to like it more than I did. So I'm also feeling like a decent 6 out of 10 on this one. It's certainly not bad, not saying that, but it just didn't have that gut feeling or that impact that I think it intended to have. At number 6, we have Color Out of Space, a new Nicolas Cage sci-fi horror vehicle. Basically, a family lives in the middle of the woods when a meteorite crashes and weird stuff just starts happening. This movie could be nicknamed Weird Stuff the Movie because there's a lot of odd and interesting things that occur in terms of the horror, in terms of setting up really interesting sci-fi lore. I do think the movie does a solid job of doing that. I think the performances from Nicolas Cage is pretty good. He does go really over the top in certain scenes, but it's usually done very subtly. It's not like he just all of a sudden goes crazy. He starts slowly doing that throughout the movie, and eventually it ends with him just going bananas. And I love this movie a lot more for that. There's some really expertly done practical effects in this film that look fucking horrifying. There are scenes in this movie that are legit, like, really unsettling. And I really appreciated the look, the way that these practical effects were merged together. I really enjoyed it. I think that the visuals of the movie are really tight too. There's a lot of interesting color palettes choices. There's also some visuals that you see through televisions and through the sky. Sometimes it does get CGI heavy, and some of the CGI isn't quite good, but I do appreciate the fact that they are attempting to do a lot of stuff with this sci-fi idea. Still, though, I think a lot of the supporting performances aren't good. Most of the family performances just aren't that solid, especially from the teenagers and the kid. Although the teenage girl does get better as the movie goes along, but she didn't really start off all that great. I think that that's something that took me out of the movie a lot, was that the performances just weren't that strong across the board. I also think that the way the sequences of events in this film goes, it does become a little bit uninteresting at times. The movie does have somewhat of a slow start, and especially with those performances, it did make, I would say, the first 25 minutes of this movie a little bit rough. So maybe if that hadn't been the case, I probably would have liked the movie a lot more. I also do find that the explanations given for what this creature, what this entity that is haunting, quote unquote, this house really is, which I appreciate. I do like the fact that they don't really have an explanation for it, but there are certain things that become confusing throughout the movie, and because they don't get an explanation, you're not really satisfied with whatever answer you've been given. So I don't know. It's not a movie that I would rewatch, I suppose. Maybe I'd rewatch certain scenes like online just to see the practical effects again, because like I said, those are really good. And I do think Nic Cage is doing his thing, cinematographer's doing his thing, but visually, performance-wise, the movie's a little bit of a letdown. I'm feeling like, I don't know, like a decent 6 out of 10 as well. A lot of decent 6s this month. Well, not really a lot. I mean, like 4. It's not like a lot. It's less than a 4. Whatever. Point is, it's fine. It's fine. If you're interested in seeing it, you're more than welcome to watch it. If you're a Nic Cage fan, I anticipate that his performance will be up to par with what you might expect of him. But still, I don't know. It was fine, I guess. At number 5, we got Lamp Life, a animated Pixar short film that was on Disney Plus. I actually kind of like this short film. I wouldn't say that it's good per se, because there's a couple of small things that just kind of bother me. One of them really being the fact that Tom Hanks does not voice Woody, which, granted, Jim Hanks, who voices Woody in this one, does a really good job of mimicking a Tom Hanks voice. And for a second there, I didn't even know that it wasn't Tom Hanks. But I think that's my problem, is like, why couldn't they have gotten Tom Hanks? Like, Woody says like maybe 5 lines this entire thing. What, you couldn't have gotten him out for like one day to just say these lines? I don't know. I don't know how that worked. The point is, though, is that this is a cute little short. It's basically a short of telling about Bo Peeps and her sheep's journey from becoming a lamp ornament to going to the playground. And there's a lot of interesting and fun scenarios that they get themselves into, some beautiful animation that is involved in this. As a short film, I think it does mostly what it's supposed to do. It's fun. It has a lot of different variety of scenes within it. The animation is gorgeous as always, although I do think that the gloss on Bo Peep is a little bit too shiny in certain scenes. Like, I think the animation could have been a little bit dwindled down for quality then. But still, I thought that this was a very decent animated shorts that had a lot of fun ideas. Like I said, some of the animation could have been a little bit less obnoxious. I do think that some of the jokes, like as in the verbal jokes, don't really work all that well. I do think it could have been a little bit better thought out in terms of what was going to be funny, because there's a lot of fun visual gags that are pretty funny, but there's not a lot of verbal jokes, and the ones that they do have kind of fall flat for me. So I actually hope that if they do more of these shorts in the future, that they kind of improve in that area. But yeah, I mean, overall the short's kind of decent. It's not nothing too crazy, but also nothing too bad either. I'm feeling like a strong 6, maybe a light 7, but I think strong 6 will probably suffice. It's a short, like it's 11 minutes long. It's on Disney Plus. If you have the time, just watch it. It's a pretty fun sit. At number 4, we have The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie's new gangster comedy. Now, I'm not really familiar with Guy Ritchie's work. I think I've seen the Sherlock Holmes movies. I've seen Aladdin. That's it, though. I haven't really seen anything else from this dude, at least that I remember. So I hear that The Gentleman is kind of a return to form for him, and this movie's shit. This movie is really decent. I do think that there has a lot of good qualities to it, particularly in its performances. Wow, all the performances in this movie are great. I think everyone does a really solid job at making these characters really convincing, really engaging. Matthew McConaughey is the best he's been in a while. Henry Golding is great. Hugh Grant almost steals the show. He is excellent in this movie. He kind of is a conniving information hogger who is using the information he has to leverage his positions in certain aspects. And I really appreciate that about this movie. Still, though, I do think that the plot is very convoluted and also very confusing at times. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of different characters that are involved in certain ways. And I don't really feel like it perfectly benefited from that fact. Not to mention the fact that at a certain point, it becomes pretty predictable how the story's gonna go. So even though the story is equally convoluted and confusing, it is also equally predictable by that regard, And I do think that that was an issue I was kind of having, because I kind of saw what was happening coming while also being confused. So that was kind of a weird mixture there. The movie does get bloody and gory when it needs to be, but it's not overtly bloody, and it is definitely a lot more tame compared to movies within this genre. I think maybe they could have gone a little bit further in certain scenes. It would have, benefited the fun factor of it. I will also say the movie's not as funny as I think I wanted it to be. And this is just me personally. Maybe you find it funny if you saw it, but I wasn't really laughing quite a lot. There were certainly outrageous and kind of fun elements to the characters and the way the story was progressing. I just don't think the movie as a whole was as funny as it could have been, or not even just as funny as I wanted it to be. And I didn't even really think the movie was going to be all that funny. Like, I wasn't coming in here thinking it was going to be a straight comedy. And in a lot of aspects it is, but in those same aspects, it doesn't really work that well for me because I wasn't really connecting with the humor that much. So yeah, this thing's decent. It has great performances, has some fun scenes, has a lot of interesting gangster-esque scenarios that I'm sure if you're a fan of the genre, you will be really into. Me personally, movie just wasn't that funny. It could have been a little bit more violent, I think, to up the fun factor of it. The movie does get confusing and convoluted while also being predictable, so that's a weird combination. So I don't know. It was fine. I don't know if I liked it nearly as much as some people did. But I mean, given that it's January, certainly not the worst thing you could be seeing this month. I'm feeling like a strong 6 out of 10. Yeah. Number 3. Number 3, third best film of the month. A film that I actually like. From this point on, the next 3 movies are good movies, and I would just recommend hands down. Number 3 is Bad Boys for Life. Quite possibly one of the more surprising films of the month. I really enjoyed this movie. It's not a perfect movie, and it definitely does fall into the cliches of films within this genre. But what I appreciate about this movie is that unlike the previous Bad Boys movies, which were fine action films that didn't really have much else to them, this movie actually has a really nice emotional core to it. I think Will Smith and Martin Lawrence still have great chemistry together, still work well together, and in the action scenes, they are still as electric as they were. Plus, given the fact that Will Smith has a lot more to do in terms of carrying a lot of the emotional baggage of the movie, is actually a really interesting twist. He's kind of this hothead who, just wants to be in the business forever, essentially, and all of a sudden a certain event starts happening, and he's starting reflecting on his own past and his own decisions, and it's actually quite engaging stuff, especially for a January action film of this caliber. I was actually quite impressed. Yes, the movie does fall under the cliches of the action genre. There are some really spotty CGI spots, especially in that final act. You've seen it in the trailer. It's it's still a little bit bothersome. However, the story did have twists that I didn't expect. It had an emotional core that was pretty surprising. And the action is as fun as it's ever been. I like this movie a lot. I wouldn't say it's a great film, and it's not necessarily one that I'm going to be rushing out to see again, but it's good. It's like a light 7 out of 10. I would recommend it. I think there's a lot to appreciate. And yeah. At number 2, we have a Taiwanese film called A Sun. This was on Netflix, released this month on Netflix platforms, and I happen to have a chance to see it. It's a really solid family drama. It's basically about a son of a family who is put in juvie for assisting in the assault of somebody else. When he comes out, he realizes that he has more responsibilities than he had anticipated going in. There's a lot of interesting, unexpected things that happen in this movie that I think really benefit its themes and the overall story that it's going for. I think all the performances across the board are really great, really strong. Everybody really gives their all in this movie. There's a lot of family drama and typical family drama that you might expect from stuff like this, but it's handled in such a subtle and realistic way that even if it is somewhat predictable, it never becomes boring or uninteresting. And a lot of that is due to the performances and is due to the way that the story is handled within the script. There are a few scenes that don't feel like they need to be there, that I don't think were completely necessary, particularly one involving a shit hose. I'll say that. That one just kind of felt a little bit weird. It felt like they needed like a comic release. And can we talk about the score for this movie? Because sometimes the score is good, but then there are other times where it feels very cheesy, very hammy, and kind of in a different movie than what the tone or the story of the movie was originally supposed to be. So I don't really know if there are any ideas that could have helped that, if maybe the score could have been a little bit different. I think that there's potential that this movie could have been a lot better. Still though, A Sun is really good. It has a lot of great performances. The story's really engaging. And even though it's predictable, maybe some scenes don't need to be there. Maybe the score could have been a little bit less cheesy. I still do think it's a pretty solid watch. It's on Netflix right now, and I would recommend it to just about anybody. If you have a problem with subtitles, I'm sorry. You're missing out on some good stuff. But, it's a good, decent 7 out of 10. That's what I'm gonna label it as. It's not perfect. It's not like a great movie or anything, but I would definitely recommend it to just about anybody who wants to watch some movies on Netflix. we're down to this, guys. The final film. The final film on this list, my number one choice for the best film of January 2020, is also a Netflix film, also an international release. This is a Japanese film called 37 Seconds. This film is about a 20-something-year-old woman who suffers from cerebral palsy who wants to be a manga artist, and in doing so is also attempting to find her own path in life away from her mother, as well as attempt to find her own sexual awakening, if you will. This is a very interesting and unique movie that I actually think is kind of great. For the most part, I think that the story and the way that it goes is very much stagnant, very much subtle. There are overt scenes that talk about the themes of the movie. However, I don't think that the movie really spoon feeds you that much information. What I appreciate about it is that we don't really get to see a lot of movies delving into we don't get to see a lot of movies, especially mainstream ones or even Netflix ones for that matter, that delve into the idea of disabled people's sexual desires. And I do think that this movie delves into that topic quite well towards the first half of the movie. At a point, the movie kind of switches what it's supposed to be about, partly because I think the main character's motives and their view of the world and what they want kind of changes as well. So there are a lot of interesting things that I think happen within this movie that would make it really engaging for anybody who would be watching this just in any general type of sense. I really appreciate the fact that the performances are really natural. Nobody feels like they're out of place. Everyone does a solid job, and especially the main actress. Especially from the main actress, who is actively really good in the movie, and it's even more impressive when you learn that the actress actually has cerebral palsy as well and has never acted in a film prior to this. Now, this does kind of lead into one of my smaller issues with the movie, is that I do think that sometimes the performance from her can come off as a little bit amateurish, can be a little bit cringy in certain regards, especially towards the beginning of the movie, although there are definitely moments towards the end that she definitely shines and is a lot more dynamic and interesting of an actress than I may have given her credit for just by watching the beginning of the movie. And I do feel like the way that the movie changes its ideas and what it wants to go for, while I do think the latter half of the movie does have a lot of interesting ideas that they delve into, it does kind of abandon its kind of sexual awakening idea. And even though it's not necessarily the main focus of the movie as a whole, I do think that that plotline didn't really have any clear closure, which did bother me a little bit. Not to say I needed to see like a sex scene with her or anything, but I do feel like that plot was a little bit abandoned in lieu of what we ended up getting towards the latter half of the film. Still though, 37 seconds, it's great. It's a really interesting and engaging drama that has a lot of fun aspects to it as well. The performances are great. I really like the way the story goes. The movie looks really nice. There are some cheesy montages here and there, and there's a weird song use that they do too, which kind of took me a little bit out of the movie. But all in all, 37 seconds, for sure the best film of January, for sure the best film of the year that's been released theatrically thus far. Well, not theatrically, but you know what I mean. That has been released thus far. Yeah, I would give 37 seconds probably like a light 8 out of 10. It's great, guys. I would highly recommend it. Well, okay. I guess that's it. I guess those are all the films that I have seen in January of 2020. Ranked from worst to best. So what did you guys think of the video? If you guys enjoyed it, you can like it. You can follow me on Twitter. If you guys have your own opinions, post them down in the comments. What movies did you see this month? What did you like? What did you not like? I am interested in seeing what you guys think. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you watched 2 minutes of it, if you watched the whole thing, I appreciate it. Bye-bye.